Good morning. Guess I should have put this on before. Totally, totally unprepared here. I want to talk to you today about one word, and that is because. We say because, that's our accent. It really should be pronounced because. Aristotle told us that everything has a cause. That's where, when they get, the evolutionists, they get back to the Big Bang theory, then they run out of causes for the Big Bang. But everything happens to us because of something. We're here because of 1,000 decisions that we've made and 10,000 decisions that our ancestors made and 10 million decisions what, ancient people have made. And today is the story of David's adultery with Bathsheba. And this passage today has no redeeming qualities in it except for warning. My pastoral theology professor, who I admired greatly, is a very funny man. He stood up in class one day and he said, if you're going to be in Christian ministry, you have to be aware of one thing. You cannot commit adultery and get away with it. Because the woman will tell somebody. It might be her friend. It might be her sister. It might be her mother. It might be somebody on the church board. You cannot get away with adultery in the ministry. And yet, as I look around, lifelong, and I see what has happened to other people in the ministry who have disregarded that advice, it destroys their whole lives. It messes up their children. It messes up their congregation. It makes some people say there is no God. I thought that person was a godly person, and look at what they did. And so the idea that you can get away with breaking the Ten Commandments, or in this particular case, the commandment against adultery and the commandment against murder, you cannot get away with it, even if you are a king, because people will see it for what it is. And so I want to look at this narrative as it is, but this is the building block narrative for the whole rest of the story of David. It's because of what he did in this passage is what led to all the terrible things that happened to him for the rest of his life. And so as we begin, I want to look at Nahum, a couple slides ahead there, please, Tally. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In whirlwind and storm is his way. In clouds are the dust beneath his feet. There's another passage that says, he who sows to the wind will reap a whirlwind. And so that the whirlwind is the word that the Bible uses for a tornado. You sow to the wind, you put your seed out there, you sow your wild oats. And that's thought to be the right of a young man growing up, to sow wild oats. But when you sow wild oats, you're going to reap a whirlwind. Your life is going to be messed up by that kind of behavior. And nobody can get away with it because the Lord does not leave guilty people unpunished. Now, sometimes I guess he overlooks things. But it definitely makes for a very difficult life. Like you can't go out and take drugs and drive a car and kill somebody. You'll never get away from the ramifications of something like that. And so this is a story of David who's come to the height of his power. He's got the whole nation of Israel. He's got his own army. He's got a house. He's got all kinds of fancy things, whatever was available. He's got the power. He's got the money. And he's got plenty of wives. He doesn't need to take somebody else's wife. And yet he takes a look at the beautiful girl and he wants more, 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 more. And as a result of that, I'm not going to tell you how this works out until next week, but I'm going to just show you how this whole thing began this week. Next slide, please. I got to get there from the beginning. In the spring of the year, how many of you like spring? I love those. When the daffodils are coming up, man, I'm happy because I know that all the rest of the flowers are about to come up after that. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle. Now, I want to set this in the context of our lesson last week because this battle that they had last week where David had sent his envoys over to the place and said, you know, we're sorry your father's dead. They shaved their beard off and cut their clothes off, and this whole big war started. So then they all went home because it was the season that they don't fight wars, the wet season over in that area of the earth. And so when spring comes, the first thing they do is they go back and they resume the battle that they left off last year. That's how they did it in those days. So in the spring of the year, when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel with him, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. He doesn't need to fight the battle anymore. He's got Joab, he's got Ashiel, he has 30 mighty men of valor who are named in Chronicles. I'm not going to talk about them this week, but maybe next week. He's got these mercenaries from other places. The army is all properly trained, and he doesn't have to do anything like that anymore, so he just sends them off to do his bidding, and he stays back in Jerusalem and sits on his couch and watches TV. Kings are supposed to be out to battle, but he's not out to battle. He is at the height of his power, and he remains in Jerusalem, and he has nothing really to do because all his needs are taken care of. People are planting fields for him. They're bringing the food in. People are cooking for him. People are cleaning his house, fixing his car, doing all the things that need to be done. And all he has to do is kick back and take it easy. He's rich. He's powerful. He has everything that he needs. Next slide, please. And it happened late one afternoon. David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house. Now you remember that the king's house is in Zion, and it's a very high spot, and you can see all around from everywhere in that place. And he looks from the roof, he looks down, and there's a woman. And she is very, very beautiful. You know, beauty is only skin deep. Have you figured that out? You can see a very beautiful man or a very beautiful woman, and they might be the gnarliest person inside. They might be ugly to the bone. But he looks down, and I'm not saying that's the way this woman was, but he looks down and he sees the woman bathing. Now, it's not like us when we go home and hop in the shower and turn the water on, and it's hot. It wasn't like that in those days. If you bathed, you had to bathe in the river, and maybe you would only bathe once a month. And it's not really like, well, as I'll show you in a future passage, it's not really like she's out for a swim either. She's bathing for a particular purpose, which I'll mention here in a little bit. And he looks down, and he sees her, and that's where the trouble begins. Like Jesus said, you know, when you look upon a woman with lust, in your heart, you've already committed adultery. And who hasn't done that? What male has not looked at a woman in lust? I mean, that's what Jesus said, that applies to everybody. Even when you're a little kid in school, the pretty girl's the one that gets all the attention from all the guys. Next slide, please. And David sent someone to inquire about the woman. This is the first inkling that there's something going on. Somebody has an inkling. David says, hey, go find out who that chick is. They had to have thought, well, here's the king. He's got all these wives already. He's got a bunch of kids. Why is he asking about this beautiful young girl down here? Whoever was sent had to have some kind of inkling. If they had any suspicious bone in them at all, I would have figured this out immediately, I think, if I was sent to find out who this person was. And so they brought back the report that this is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Now, these people that are mentioned here, I'm going to talk to you more about them next week. But these are people who are fairly close in the military. Uriah particularly is one of the mighty men of valor, one of the 30 bravest special forces in the army of David. And so David, when he finds out that this woman is his wife, he should have immediately said, hey, this is somebody they've come from another country. They came from the sons of Heth. He's a Hittite. He's a mercenary. He's coming. He's helping me fight my battles. Why should I mess with his wife? I mean, that would have been the proper response. Yet, that was not his response at all. And I'll talk to you about Eliam and Bathsheba more next week. Next slide. So David sent messengers. Messenger is plural. There are two, at least, to get her. And she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she was purifying herself after her period. I'm sorry for you, ladies. It is in the Bible, and it is a fact of life. And there were certain laws concerning purification after the period. And I think it was put in here specifically so that the readers would understand that there's no possible way when this child she's about to conceive, there's no possible way it's Uriah's child because she's just had her period. And the law says that after 7 days, in the evening, a woman who had their period, they didn't have pads and they didn't have liners and they didn't have tampons and all of those things. And so it was really you think it's uncomfortable now. Imagine what it was like 1,000 years BC where you had to actually carry a real rag around with you, and every time you sat down you might leak something. And so after the period is done, they were told that they had to go and they had to wash in the evening of the seventh day, which is exactly what she was doing when David is looking down on her. When he saw her, she was purifying herself. She was taking her bath after her period. And so I want to point out that these two messengers became the two witnesses. Adultery is a capital crime. I mean, we overlook it here. Oh, everybody does it and it's no big deal. Well, it's the cause of much divorce. It's the cause of much family pain. And so in ancient days, they didn't put up with it. They would actually stone people to death for doing this. And so now we have a problem. We have a political figure who's actually the judge, because the time of judges is past. It's now the time of kings, and the kings make the judgment. And we have a judge that is corrupt and is doing the very things that he is responsible to hold others accountable for. And so the whole society is in a place like this where there can't be any proper justice. And he sends 2 messengers to get here. So now there's at least 2 more people that have firsthand knowledge of bringing her back, and she's going into the king's room to commit adultery. So therefore, on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, he is subject to death. But he is the judge. And this is where Paul gets the admonition, don't receive an accusation against an elder except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. And this is also the idea that is behind the scripture that says, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst. It doesn't mean that if you've only got 2 people to show up for a meeting that God is going to be with you. The 2 or 3 that are gathered together in his name are gathered together in judgment. That's the real meaning of that passage. And so David now has a gossip and 2 actual witnesses to the fact that he's committing adultery with this woman. It doesn't say what her motive is, but we can easily see what his is. Next slide, please. I don't want to say much about this, but there's the law that's being followed by Bathsheba. The woman conceived. Now, it's interesting. Orthodox Jews, they don't do anything during the period time. And after the period, after a few days after the period, is the time that women are most susceptible to conception. And so David impregnates this woman, and she sent word. We don't know by who, but now more people are aware of what's going on. I'm pregnant. She didn't go see him directly. She sent a message. And so David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah. And Joab sent Uriah to David. We see a super sneaky side of King David here. I know how to cure this problem. I'll just make it so that her husband can get back with her and he'll think that the kid is his. Do you think people do that kind of stuff now? Just turn on Jerry Springer. I don't watch Jerry Springer, but I have watched parts of Jerry Springer, and the woman doesn't know which one is the father. So they do the test. Well, they didn't have any pregnancy. They didn't have a pregnancy test, and they didn't have a paternity test in those days. And, up until the time of paternity test, the husband was presumed by law to be the father no matter what, whether he was the father or not. But now that we have the test, that's not true anymore. But even up until the 60s, maybe even the 70s, that was the case in the United States. So he decides to send for this guy. He knows him well. Next slide, please. Uriah came, and David asked Joab and how the people fared. How is the war going? Well, somebody casually observing would say, well, he's just looking for a report of what's going on in the war. But underneath it, the motive is to get him to go back to his house and have relations with his wife and become the father of David's baby. So David says, go down to your house and wash your feet. That's a euphemism. You know what a euphemism is? It's an expression that means something completely different. And it means go have relations with your wife. You want to come over to my house tonight? No, I got to go home and wash my feet. That's, we have, if you have to go to the bathroom in the South, they say, I got to go see a man about a dog. That means I got to go to the bathroom. The same type of thing. It's euphemism. Go on home and see your wife. But he wouldn't do it. They had rules. Do you remember when David, as a younger man, he brought his friends with him to the priest's house, and he says, I'm hungry, and the priest said, well, all I have is the holy bread. And David said, well, can you give it to us? We're hungry. And he said, as long as your men have not been with women. And so the idea is that when you're in a war, you don't do connubial visits with your wife. You're going to war, you need all your strength, and so you turn away from having any relations like that while you are in the service of the army. And so that was the idea that was just commonly known among the people. That's not what you do. And Uriah said, I'm not going to do that. My brothers are out there fighting. The battle is going on, and these people are being killed and hurt, and so I'm not going to do that. I'll just go back to the battle. And so he did not go down to his house. Next slide. When they told David Uriah did not go down to his house, David said, you come on a journey. Why did you not go down to your house? You see, Uriah had a lot more self-control of his body than David did. David is a lustful person. He's got all these women. He doesn't need this woman. And Uriah can control himself, and so he doesn't go down to the house. So what does David do? Uriah says the ark of Judah is in booths, and Joab and the servants are camping in an open field. Shall I go down to my house and eat, to drink, to lie with my wife? As you live, as your soul lives, I will not do it. So what does David do? Tries to get him drunk, and succeeds in getting him drunk. And some people would judge Uriah for this, but what was he supposed to do? He's at the king's table. Here, drink, 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 drink. Thinking that his inhibitions will be lowered, and after he's had a few, that he'd be willing to go down and see his wife. Because, of course, we know that she's beautiful. Remain here today, and I'll send you back. Uriah remained. On the next day, David invited him to eat and drink in his presence, and made him drunk. In the evening, he went out to lie on his couch with the servants of his Lord. He did not go down to his house. You know, what you do in secret has a tendency to show up in public. Ask any politician. Am I right? They do all this stuff, and we're not really shocked by it. We find out that, Hunter Biden's laptop has all kinds of homemade pornography on it. We say, well, that's whatever. But it's really scandalous. So, pardon me? I'm on, where are you? Keep going. Go. There, next slide. That's where I am, right there. David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. Now, how many of you have written a letter and mailed it in the last 3 years? How many? Yeah, you're old. You're from another generation. I haven't written a letter by hand in probably, how long, Sean? Ever? I can't even, well, I never could write properly. I have a doctor's signature. My mother used to make me write thank you letters. I got a thank you letter from somebody today. But in those days, they didn't have letters in envelopes. What they did is they had a piece of paper which was very, very valuable to make paper. They were made out of cotton, and the scribe would write the letter out, or the person sending it would write the letter, and they would put a wax seal on the letter, and then they would send it. And if you opened that seal and that letter wasn't addressed to you, it was death penalty just about. That's why the book of Revelation is sealed in 7 seals, because nobody can open it. So basically the beginning of the book of Revelation means don't even try to figure this out because nobody can open this except Jesus. So that's beside the point. So he gives a letter to Uriah to send to Joab, the commander of the army. In the letter he wrote, "Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting and draw back from him so that he may be struck down and die." Have any of these types of war crimes been committed in the service of the United States? I mean, lots of times this has happened. Well, I'll just fix that guy when we're in the battle. I won't cover him, and I won't have to deal with him anymore. How awful for a person who is, as a young person, a minstrel who's praising God and who's refusing to kill Saul because he's the Lord's anointed and doing his best and trying to be as honest as he can be. And now when he comes to power, when he has control over the army, when he has control over Joab, he's now willing to take his mighty man's wife and not only commit adultery with her, but now he's willing to kill her husband so that nobody finds out that he is the father of the woman's child. How far has he come? If he was running for president, would you vote for him? Three temptations of kings: power, money, and sex. Three things for men in the ministry: power, money, and sex. It's always been this way. So he decides to kill the guy. And it's not just an ordinary soldier. It is a brave man who's in the list of the mighty men in Chronicles, which I'll show you next week. Here's your death warrant. Take it to Joab, and he hands him the letter. And he delivers the letter of his own death. How awful. Most of us would probably have problems forgiving this guy. And you may even be saying, right now, how can this guy possibly be the guy who's after God's heart? I don't know where Trump is, but at one point he started quoting Christian stuff, and nobody believed him because of his divorce from his first wife and his adultery with his second wife and his business dealings and stuff like that. I don't know. You got to vote for somebody. And I don't know, the last number of presidential elections, I've voted for the one that I thought wasn't as bad as the other. And I could say more about that, but next slide. As Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to a place where he knew there were valiant warriors. The men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of his servants among the people fell. So it's not just Uriah who dies, but it's other people in the army around Uriah have now lost their wives, and their children are now fatherless, and they're in a system where there isn't, any way to take care of the widows and orphans. And so it's not just Uriah who dies. Why did these other people die? Because. Why did Uriah die? Because. Why did David do that? Because he wanted to cover up his sin and make sure people didn't know it. Because he wanted to lust after what he didn't have. because what he had was not enough for it to satisfy him. He was horrible. Yet he wrote most of the Psalms. And the money that he earned, he left to the building of the temple in the next generation. You know, people are good and evil. You know, some branches of Christianity say that people are totally depraved, and even if they do something good, they do it good from a wrong motive. That's not really scriptural. The day you eat of that fruit, the knowledge of good and evil, you will be good and evil. And even the most wicked person in the world has a little bit of good, and even the best person in the world has a little bit of evil. And if you feed the good will grow, and if you feed the evil will grow. And so through his coming up and all the blessings that God gave him and all the victories that God gave him, now he thinks of himself as being the king, and not God is not the king, that God will overlook what he does because he's very, very special to God. And I've known a lot of Christians like that. Oh, God isn't going to judge me. He likes me. That's what the preacher told me. Yeah, he likes you, but in the beginning I showed you that passage in Nahum that says, you know, God is gracious and extremely merciful. However, he will not leave the guilty unpunished. And so we have a situation now where people are dead, all to cover up a sin. Next slide. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting, and he instructed the messenger, when you have finished telling the king all the news about the fighting, if the king's anger arises and he says to you, why did you go so near the city to fight? Did you not know they would shoot from the wall? Now this was certainly in the military tactics of war. In those days, don't get near the wall because there's going to be people up there that are firing catapults. They had catapults by those days where they threw rocks off the wall, and they had archers on the wall, and so, you know, so Don could hit somebody quite a good distance away, and so they had excellent archers on the wall, and so Joab just ran Uriah and a few other people there against the wall, and they all started shooting their bows and their arrows, and they killed some of the army. And so Joab anticipates what David is going to say when he hears this. Why is he going to anticipate? Because David was a mighty warrior himself, and David was the trainer of Joab. David was Joab's mentor in military tactics. And so when the news comes back, when he finds out that there have been people killed because they went too near the wall, he's going to blow his stack. And so Joab says, make sure you mention this, that Uriah is dead, and then David will understand that it wasn't a blunder on me as a military person. It's what he actually asked me to do. I've read this a million times, and we tend to just look at, okay, he committed adultery and he killed Uriah, but not only did he commit adultery, and not only did he kill Uriah, and not only did he kill these other people, he killed his own reputation, and he killed his ability to rule. It doesn't say that in this narrative. But all the rest of the story of David is based on this. All the problems that David will have for the rest of his life are caused by this. I think I told you before when I was going to some clergy meetings, and in the clergy meetings there were people that were not ordained ministers, but there were licensed ministers, and there were Christian workers. And, you know, we did have some meetings that were only for senior pastors, and you can talk about different things in those meetings than you can in the other meetings. They're all in ministry, but being a pastor is one thing, and that is another. And there were always people in there that were members of denominations and fell into this kind of sin and were defrocked. And then they came to the group that I was associated with, and well, let's forgive and forget, and let's give them credentials. But they never were able to get over the fact that they were defrocked for cause. And they would always say, well, when I was a pastor, this is how we did it. When I was a pastor, this is how we did it. And it used to greatly annoy me because they're not pastors anymore. They saw some woman in their congregation and they left their wife and they committed adultery with somebody else's wife or with some young girl in the church or something like that. And now they are has-beens because. Very famous people. We could name the names. Jimmy Swaggart. Marvin Gorman. Marvin Gorman came to my Bible school and he preached the most emotional message I ever heard. And I thought, boy, there's a man of God. Well, Marvin couldn't keep his zipper up. And Jimmy Swaggart exposed him and he was defrocked. And then Marvin found out Jimmy Swaggart wasn't so pure himself, and he was known to be taking women of ill repute into hotel rooms, and so he got a private investigator, and they found Jimmy in the hotel room, and Marvin went and let the air out of the tires on his Cadillac, and waited for him to come out, and said, "What you doing, Jimmy?" And down went Jimmy Swaggart. Jessica Hahn. Jim Baker. Jessica Hahn. They set him up. Took the whole Heritage USA thing down. All because they couldn't keep their zipper up on their pants. And it's true of ordinary people as well, because this type of behavior, this is why adultery is not allowed. This is why adultery is actually a death penalty sin. Can it be forgiven? Obviously, the story of David shows that it can, but it doesn't do away with the problems that it causes. Next slide, please. So David uses a reference to the book of Judges, which they used. They studied the battles of previous wars. And Joab postulates that David is going to say, don't you remember the story of Abimelech, Jerubaal's son, which is Gideon? Did not a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall? You stay away from the wall. Why did you go up to the wall? So the messengers went and came to David, and all that Joab had sent him to tell, the messenger said, they didn't even wait. The men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate, and the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah is dead also. They didn't even wait for David to get angry and quote that war story from previous times. And David said, next slide, please. Paraphrase. Don't feel guilty about this. David's conscience is now so seared that he doesn't feel guilty about it. And Job is told by David to comfort him. Don't feel guilty about it. Continue your war, take the city, be encouraged, everything's going to be all right. Now, we know that Joab was a vicious person. Remember some of the previous encounters we've had with him where he killed the commander of Saul's army in cold blood. I mean, he's already done some horrible things. And so it's David, he has a little bit of an inkling, well, maybe Joab will feel guilty about this. We have to assuage his guilt because he has to help my army, he has to lead my army and keep control of these people around us, and so I need him. I've already lost one of my mighty men in Uriah, so I especially need Joab even more. So encourage him. When the wife of Uriah heard that her husband was dead, she lamented. And when the mourning was over, that was usually 7 days in that culture, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife, bore him a son. Did she even know? My guess is probably not. Well, one thing that Reverend Willie Richardson didn't say, he did say you can't get away with it, she'll tell somebody. But even if nobody were to know, God knew. That's one of the first things my mother ever told me. I think I was about 3. She took me to the Methodist Church in Victor, and I don't know if the Sunday school lesson, I think, was on stealing, because I stole shortly after that and knew I shouldn't have done it, so I'm thinking it was probably on stealing. But Mom said, whatever you do, the Lord sees it. God knows. And you can't fool God. You can fool people, but you cannot fool God. Now, Tally, are we able to run that YouTube? Okay. Watch this little marble. It's not running very well.
Live streaming and running videos.
Well, here's what happens. It comes down and it walks all the way up the stairs. One after another after another. And when it gets to the top, it's a basketball. And the basketball comes down the stairs and destroys everything down the stairs after it's walked all the way up the stairs. And I'm sorry I can't show it to you. Yeah, it'll be on the live stream. Kelly will put the URL up of it. So what has happened here, and I'm going to just tease for next week. What has happened here is David has killed one of his mighty men, who is the daughter of Eliam, who is another one of his mighty men. And his father is Ahithophel, who is the main counselor to David. His main counselor, he's taken his granddaughter, brought her into his house, and made her his wife after killing her husband. How many of you think that's going to work out? Is David's life ever going to be trouble-free? And what is God going to say about this? Next week I'll tell you, because the prophet comes in and speaks to David, and all hell breaks loose in David's life. And in the end, it's a huge, huge mess. Willie Richardson said, "You can't get away with it." She will tell somebody. She told her father and she told her grandfather. And the gossip mill from the people that were involved in it. And his life was never peaceful again until the day he died. And horrible things happened in his family. So I'm going to tell you about that in the weeks ahead. Are there any comments? Yes, Gene.
So it's interesting that last night, because I realized you were going to be teaching on this passage, I started thinking and contemplating and going over in my mind this whole thing. And I also went through what you said earlier about, people are, there's two different views. Are people basically good with capacity for evil, or do you think people are basically evil with the capacity for good? It just went hand in hand with a lot of things that you were teaching. But what came to me was Joab, when he sent that message back with his men about what had happened. He obeyed David's command. He knew it was wrong. I don't know if he knew why David wanted Uriah killed. It never said that he knew why, but he knew it was wrong.
He's just willing to kill somebody for no reason.
He knew it was wrong.
The Godfather says, go kill somebody.
And I contemplated the fact that when the men that Joab sent back to David didn't give David the chance to respond, like Joab had told him, if he responds this way. I think Joab knew that those men weren't going to let David respond. They were going to go ahead and hit him with the trump card right up during the story. Don't get mad because Uriah is also, I think Joab was sending David a message by reciting the verse where she killed, one of the leaders with the millstone, throwing it off the wall.
Gideon's son.
So I think Joab was telling David, you have just killed your leadership ability. You've just killed, and I'm sending you this message in relationship to that passage to let you know that you've just killed your leadership ability with me.
Yes, and the fact that Gideon's son was the judge, he was the head guy at the time.
Yeah, I didn't
Good point.
associate all that until you were teaching it, and now I do associate those two things. I think Joab at that point had really decided that David had lost a lot of his prestige with him, and he was the leader of the army. So,
anyone else? I know it's a pretty negative passage, but it's a warning to us.
One of the things that stood out to me was the lessons in parenting. And they're not really, they're relevant to me because of where I am in my life, but you've got David who sees something he wants. And because of his authority, because of his wealth, he gets what he wants all the time. He's used to it. So he makes a very poor decision because he hasn't learned how to not get what you want. Then you've got Uriah, who is in the middle of a battle. He knows what he wants. But he knows he has more important things to do than get what he wants immediately, that instant gratification. So then you see that all play out. So for me, I look at, back to parenting. How are we raising our children? What are we teaching our children? And then your comment about inherently good, inherently evil. You have to nurture the good. Another parenting lesson. Our kids have both. You have to nurture one of them all the time from the day they're born. And so it was just interesting to me to sit here, probably different view from most people or some, but it was like, man, you can see what happens from these stories if you're not consciously making the right decisions as a parent. No one's perfect,
Yeah,
especially a parent.
I suspect you read ahead there and saw what happens with the kids.
Lots of things. But yeah, it was just, that was something that stood out to me that was maybe off topic from the story, but it was
It's
like,
not, because that's where the story's
yeah,
going.
it is where it goes, but it was just, I don't know. That's how it applied to me today.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sean is telling me we have to do communion, but we could hear from one more person if we wanted to. Yeah, thank you, because I might have forgotten, but today I did not forget. I couldn't hear you. Oh, no. The world is about to end. Okay, if there's nobody else, I'm going to wash my hands, and would the elders like to come up here and help me serve communion, please? Pardon me? You're supposed to provide the music.